let's say you want to draw a still life. Here's some objects that I brought that I'm going to try and draw. So something like this, it's metal and it reflects the light. I have a piece of fruit, a little mandarin. I have some dried flowers, tiny roses. We always have to start with the horizon line, somewhere that the objects will be sitting. Now you can do this freehand, or you can use a ruler like I do. And to simplify each shape, as I mentioned, we will be looking at the geometric shapes that we can identify in each object. For example, in the mandarin, it is spherical, so it's a sphere, and also, from top, it's just a circle. But for an object like this one, it is cylinder, but there's also, it's thinner on the top and it thickens on the bottom, so it's not so straightforward and simple. What we can do to deconstruct and simplify an object like this is to create a symmetry. So we're going to draw a line. We're supposed to divide this object into 2 equal parts. Further, if you want to continue simplifying the shape, you can look at your shape and see if you can maybe divide it into 3 equal parts or 2 equal parts. So having another line right in the center. Let's say that's almost the center. And I'm just drawing these lines as guidelines. They're not supposed to be so dark. I'm just making it darker for the video here so you can see them better. So maybe I'm going to divide this shape into 4 equal parts and go from there. So I'm just gonna draw a line there to figure out where each part of this object is falling. So let's say here's the head and here is the bottom of the object, and then the widest part of the object is almost at the second half of it, at the bottom of it. So I will try to measure it by using my pencil. You want to hold it right in front of you and just extend your arm all the way. And if you have your objects too close to you, you should also place the objects somewhere farther, or you can take a photo. Once you arrange your objects, take a photo, use a photo as a reference. So with the symmetrical line, you can identify what is happening on each part of this object, and if the shape is repeating, you just repeat it. If it's different, you will find out how different is it. Let's say I'm now getting close to the neck. So the neck is the part that does not change from this side to the other, and then there is this little handle thing that makes the shape asymmetrical, so I should be adding that later. And so it has a very long neck, almost all the way to half of this object, but then as it gets closer to the second half, it starts getting wider. So I can even identify how wide it is by, again, using my pencil and measuring it by eye and figuring out how wide this object is. So essentially you make these extra lines to give yourself some guidelines and put a point there so you can just connect all these dots together, right? And here, looks like on the bottom. And so wherever there is no light, it's going to be shadow. So on the bottom of this object, there is shadow. and I will try to follow the symmetry, and whatever that I'm doing on one side should be happening on the other side. I play around with it until I am fully satisfied with all parts of this object. If I am not happy, I'm going to maybe erase or just keep going over it. As you see, I try to use as little as possible the eraser. If it's not necessary, I do not use the eraser at all. And then so here's a little panel that comes all the way out. And now let's say here's my piece of fruit. It's sitting right beside it. And you also want to look at the proportions, how big or small one object is in comparison to the other. So my mandarin is almost 1/5 of this metal vase object that I have. So, and for my dried flowers, I'm not gonna draw the whole branch, but just maybe one or two. Let's say it's here, and try to again look at the form of the petals, and general shape is kind of circular, and then there are more petals inside it. Again, I'm not gonna go over too much details. This is just my first line drawing, the first layer. There will be many more layers on top of this, so I'm not going to add too many things to it. So here's my first layer of my drawing. It doesn't matter that I have these lines here and they're not correct. That's totally fine, because I'm going to either shade this object here, or I'm going to be using Conte or my soft pastels with color and start completing this drawing. So let's say I'm going to use Conte for this. Okay. For this object, as I said, yes, it is metallic and it reflects light, so I have to pay attention to where the light falls and what color should I be using. We need to be mindful of the quality of the material, the texture, and how much light it is attracting, and also the perspective of it. All right, so if you ever cannot figure out how dark or how light something is, you can just squint your eyes, and by squinting you will be able to find out if somewhere is darker, then you will need to add more value to it. So you will be adding more pressure with your medium, whether it's pencil that you're using or Conte or soft pastel. And when there is less dark, it's more light, then you will decrease the pressure. And if you're going to add colors, then of course you have to also be mindful of the color that you're using. I'm just gonna do kind of a mixture of all three for you so you can get a better idea. Another exercise you want to do is just trying to do this shading exercise. So starting from one end, pressing hard and then releasing, whether it is vertical or horizontal. I start from lighter color because then that will allow me to go darker on top of it. But if I start right away with dark, there's not so much room for me to add more light. Okay, I'm going to blend a little bit. Just my fingers. As you see, all those guidelines that I drew at the beginning, they're all gone. Very nicely just are being covered by all the other layers that go on top of it. If I wasn't using content, I was using still just a graphite pencil, same thing would have happened. It would have just become one of the layers, and none of the initial layers of just the guidelines and the symmetrical line will be all covered. So, and here's where the most light is falling. So I'm just going to keep that part light, not go over it. If I need to bring in more light at this point, I can use my eraser and just erase some parts that needs more light. Here we go. Just going to add blue here and purple to that. Alright, so now let's say I want to do the same thing but with pencil for this mandarin. Of course, it would have been much nicer if it's in color, but if you don't want to use color and you just want to keep it black and white, you can do that as well. So for a spherical shape like this, you want to start shading again from the center, top to bottom, and you just try to keep your lines as close to each other as possible. Now this may take some time and practice, but do your best. And you want to do a very smooth transition from your shading into the lines that are your outline. So you don't want them to be separate forms. They are all part of one shape together. And then you can change your direction and add different sides. So if there is light falling on that side but more shadow on this side, so I'm going to go over it with a separate layer. But okay, and as I am adding more, I'm just going to also pronounce some of the characteristics of my object here. And there is way more shadow right at the bottom of this object, because when these two objects are close to each other, there is not much light between them. So this shadow is essentially much darker. And how do I show that this is a mandarin and not an orange or an apple? It does have those little dots that I will add afterwards. There we go. And now, if I compare this object to my mandarin, this is much darker, so I will have to probably make this object darker than my mandarin if they were all black and white. Right now I'm just showing you different kinds with mixed medium, so you can have an idea of using either or. And with the flowers, let's try using the colored pencils. Alright, so in the middle it's darker, so I'm just going to add parts, and then as you are going outward, it's lighter. I'm going to use some water to just there we go. Not bad. Of course, I can continue working on this and perfecting it, but to show you the possibilities of what you can achieve when you draw with various mediums. So here's my drawing. I can continue working on it. Something else that you want to pay attention is also the negative space. So any area that is in between, around the objects, you have to pay attention to the negative space too if you want to get the shape of the objects correct. Sometimes it's easier to look at the negative space whereas the actual object. Thank you so very much for watching, and I hope this was helpful.